Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Expert Podcast. I'm sitting here staring at 6 pages of notes that I just took from this podcast you're about to listen to. If you are in any way interested in living an amazing life, which I know you are, your brain is always going to be the limiting factor, or perhaps the gateway, if you will, to living an incredible life. How we perceive the environment around us, how we acquire information, how we recall information, all these things are literally determining our life. And today I interviewed Mr. David Tomen, the originator of a website called Nootropics Expert. And nootropics range from everything from, racetams to caffeine to lion's mane to so many things that you may or may not have heard of that are literally designed to help you optimize your brain. And this conversation was absolutely incredible and insightful. And I got so much great information from this man. And I'm incredibly grateful that he gave it to us for free. Just be able to sit here and listen for about 60 minutes and bombard your brain with valuable golden nuggets about how to improve your brain. I can't express how grateful I am for this information. So we get into such things as certain nootropics that may actually be detrimental to your health, certain ones that would absolutely surprise you that you've never heard of that he's using daily to upgrade his brain. We get into everything that you need to know about serotonin, acetylcholine, GABA, and all of these amazing neurotransmitters and how to influence them supplementally. The ones that you want to avoid later in the day, the ones that you want to take early in the day, how often to take them. We certainly didn't cover all the nootropics because there's literally hundreds of these things, but we covered the best ones and the most important ones, at least the ones that we know about. We covered how you can upgrade your brain, how you can learn to retain information more effectively. We also talked about some things that you never heard of before, and you're going to absolutely love this conversation with David Tomen. And one of the things that we talk about, and he's a huge advocate of, is lion's mane. And you guys know that I have become the world's greatest advocate of lion's mane. And what David Tomen talks about is lion's mane benefit in nerve growth factor, NGF, nerve growth factor improvement or increasing your brain's ability to grow new neurons. Now that's interesting, right? So if I'm trying to learn something, if I'm trying to improve my ability to retain information, improve my ability to develop new skills, your ability to grow new nerves is instrumental in that. And the ingredient that we talked about is lion's mane, and how that is probably the best ingredient that we know of right now for improving nerve growth factor. So I've, as you guys will now know, recently associated with Four Sigmatic, and they've been so generous as to sponsor the podcast and give you guys a hookup. So if you go to foursigmatic.com/muscle, you can get 15% off Four Sigmatic right now. And you can also use the discount code MUSCLE at checkout. And without further ado, I am grateful for you, and I'm grateful for mushrooms that make my brain work better. Have an amazing day. Enjoy the episode. So David, you want to talk about hacking flow state?
Do indeed.
That sounds fascinating. Are you connected with Jamie Wheal?
I don't know him personally, but I've got his books. And when I was researching the one of the posts that I wrote on flow state, after I wrote it, I got the book in the mail and I read through it. And Stealing Fire basically mirrored everything that I had found out.
Oh, interesting. Have you been studying How Csikszentmihalyi? Is that where you're getting a lot of your research?
I'm sorry?
Have you studied Mihail Csikszentmihalyi?
I have not. Oh, yes.
Okay.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
He was part of the research.
Okay.
He came
I'd love to talk about it. Are you writing a book about it?
I'm not writing I wrote a book called Head First.
Yeah.
The Complete Guide to Healing and Optimizing Your Brain with Nootropic Supplements. It's about 600 pages. And flow state just kind of like came out of some of the research, and I've got a fairly large audience. and a lot of them are executives and CEOs, and athletes and gamers. And flow state directly applies to these people.
It absolutely does. And, my demographic is, very much athlete centered, and, a lot of people just trying to optimize their performance, but a lot of people are trying to optimize their mind for business. I get tons of executives and CEOs as well, entrepreneurs, people who, time is of the essence, and being focused means I can get more done in my day. So I'd love to have you talk about this. So I've dived into your website. To be honest, the reason I found you was I use Nootropics Expert as kind of my resource to learn everything there is about nootropics. So I'm very grateful for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And, I've obviously looked at your book, Secrets of an Optimized Brain, and I haven't yet picked up Head First, but it's definitely something that's on my list of things to do. You know how it gets when you're a busy entrepreneur. I've got 57 books on my book list.
Sure. Head First is not the kind of book that you would read cover to cover. It's more like
it's a resource.
More like a resource, more like a reference manual.
Right.
I've got the first part explains how I got into this and how I arrived where I am now. And then a good chunk of the book is reviews on individual nootropics. I think it's about 72 or 75 listed in there. And then the last couple of chapters has suggested stacks for whatever you're trying to fix, anxiety or depression or learning and memory.
And would it be relatively similar to what you have on Nootropics Expert, or is it a deeper dive, or how does it differ?
It's very similar. It's just in book form.
Awesome. Because that's probably the greatest resource that I can find right now on the internet for understanding, the intricacies of and interactions of nootropics. So that's really what I want to dive into today.
Well, I'm very grateful that you say that. Because that was the intention from the get-go when I started that site about 2.5 years ago. Because I've been using nootropics for, I don't know, probably 12 years or so, right around just after I was a diagnosed adult ADD. And had to figure out how to make Ritalin in my brain work better. And so I have tried various stacks over the years. The first one I tried, I think, was Focus Factor that I got at GNC. And one thing led to another. And about 3 years ago, I came to the realization, because I was writing in that for the alternative health market, and specifically for nootropic supplements, and realized that there was no authority site. There wasn't one place that I could go that had everything that I needed to. It was little bits and pieces from all over the place. And so that was the intention from the get-go, is just to make one authoritative resource that if somebody had any kind of problem with their brain, they could find an answer.
You've done a great job. I've been on that site probably 100 times plus to try to find out, if I'm researching an ingredient, or if I'm researching a certain ailment or a particular affliction that one of my clients is having, one that I'm having. And always, my greatest infatuation is trying to upgrade your brain, right? Is trying to, so as a child.
Well, once you fix it, you want to start tweaking it.
Yeah.
And make it better and better. It's interesting that you explain how you use it as a resource, because a lot of the readers of Nootropics Expert and some of the people that bought the book are pharmacists and alternative health professionals like naturopaths. So, it's working like intended.
Yeah, it's honestly a wonderful resource, and you've done an amazing job. It's overwhelming at times because, unless you have a good base understanding, you don't know where to start and look. But you've done a good job of saying, hey, here's the best, supplements, and here's the best thing for this particular thing. You've done an excellent job. Like I said, I'd love to start talking about flow state. So that is, ultimately, as a professional athlete for a long time, I was able to hack that, or at least I was able to achieve it, but it was always through some intense, immense type of training, right? It was always like getting well beyond what I thought was comfortable, and all of a sudden you're in this state where time stands still and your ability to perform is somewhat superhuman. Is that how you would define a flow state?
I would. Flow state is, and that was something I was going to talk about in a couple of minutes, but flow state is really, there's not really a recipe for it. You I can't give you a recipe and say, Ben, you take this step 1, step 2, step 3, and then you'll get into flow. That's not the way it works. Flow just kind of happens. And the thing about flow is that everybody listening to this probably experienced flow at some times in their life. It's just think about a time where you were just totally absorbed in something that had your total attention, and that you were so focused that everything else disappeared. The whole world vanished. And if you think about how you felt at that time, your sense of self vanished. You were no longer self-conscious about anything. Time dilated. So like a 5-hour experience felt like 5 minutes. But the opposite is also true. Time can slow down, so it feels like things are happening in slow motion.
Yeah. Now, do you think this is, after your research, do you think this is something that it's necessary to be internalized rather than externalized? So, one of the ways I advocate training is creating an internal focus, whether it's, whether you're on the bike or you're climbing a mountain, or you're doing an endurance race, or you're trying to lift in the gym. Starting to pay attention to the internal cues of your body and the way your body feels on the inside, rather than thinking or rather than observing what's happening around you, has been a really great way for me to, almost consistently be able to get into what I would call a flow state where, the music doesn't exist, the people around you don't exist. You're just feeling. It's almost a meditative state.
It's totally inside you. And it is, I'm a longtime meditator. And when you think about what is happening then, it's really the real you that's being accessed. Yeah. It's the part before consciousness. Yeah. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but it's that spot just before consciousness that makes consciousness possible.
And now we're speaking, like, if we're looking at anatomical, are we speaking about limbic brain type stuff, or you just mean just some place that doesn't necessarily have a defined location, but just before our conscious brain starts to exist?
Correct. There's no defined location. Nobody's been able to pinpoint it. We know the parts of the brain where things are happening because of fMRIs, for example. Yep. There's been plenty of clinical studies on the parts of the brain that are active, but nobody ever will be able to, unless they come up with some kind of new technology, are able to pinpoint exactly this is where this thing is.
Do you know what parts of the brain are being activated?
The prefrontal cortex is being deactivated.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense, right? No logical thinking.
So, well, let's go back for a second to what you said about a brief mention about executives. Yeah. And McKinsey and Company actually did a study a couple of years ago for 5,000 executives during their workshops, and they concluded that senior executives in flow are 5 times better and more productive than those that aren't.
No question.
So this is kind of like a big deal, and if you can do anything to influence it, so much the better.
So, if I define flow as someone who knows nothing about the actual definition of flow, I would say, similar to, I guess, what you've been saying, is it's almost like things are slowing down, like you're able to just focus on one very particular task. It almost sounds like you're creating a low-level alpha state, right? You're, talking about the brain waves. Are we just creating a low-level alpha state that almost allows me to be meditative while I'm asleep? Sorry, while I'm awake.
Going a little. It depends on which part of the flow state you're in. Let's back up for a second and go back to what Mihail, the guy that he did an interview with Wired magazine in 1996, and this is how he described flow: being completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away. Time flies. Every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one, like playing jazz. Your whole being is involved, and you're using your skills to the utmost. That was the guy that actually identified the flow state many years ago of how he describes that.
That's a beautiful
But I can
thing.
go in, yeah, it really is. I can go into I found 3 areas of neurobiology that are affected that I can walk you quickly through.
Great.
And then explain how you can recognize when you're going into a flow state, and then specific nootropics that can affect each one of those things that are happening in your brain.
Perfect.
So there's basically 3 changes in the human body or in the neurobiology that have been identified. And this comes from the original research, and including guys like Steve Kotler and Jamie Wheel. The first one is your prefrontal cortex. It shuts down. And they actually have a name for it. It's called transient hypofrontality.
Yep.
Now, the prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain where the higher cognitive functions are happening, where your sense of morality, your sense of will, and your sense of self. So going into flow is like somebody hitting the pause button on that part of your brain. And David Eagleman, he's the director of the Baylor College of Medicine's Laboratory for Perception and Action. He found that when your prefrontal cortex goes on hiatus, your perception of time changes.
Oh, interesting.
And then Aaron Dietrich of American University of Beirut found that transient hypofrontality is associated with every altered state of consciousness. That guy conducted a lot of research in flow state in exercise-induced states of consciousness.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like where the runner's high comes from. It's where your inner critic is turned off. There's no sense of being self-conscious. And then Charles Lim of John Hopkins conducted a study with 11 jazz musicians. And these guys were 25 to 56 years old, and he stuck them in an fMRI machine. And he found that during jazz improvisation, their prefrontal cortex shut down. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second one is neurotransmitters. Yeah. How flow starts, it really starts typically with suffering and anxiety. Your inner critic is in high gear. The early stage of flow starts with a spike in norepinephrine and the hormone cortisol.
Interesting.
It's like it's that part where you're freaking out and you're going, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the beginning of it. And then a couple of things can happen. Either you become completely exhausted, or if you're wise enough and you notice it, you surrender and you relax. And that's when nitric oxide kicks in and it flushes out the norepinephrine and cortisol. And then once you get into flow state, dopamine kicks in. And it feels like you want more of this and you want to keep on doing it. And endorphins kick in so that you don't feel any pain. And the neurotransmitter anandamide increases, which primarily affects cannabinoid receptors. And if you recall from your studies, anandamide is the Sanskrit word for bliss. It affects your feelings of motivation and pleasure. And then finally, you enter the memory consolidation stage, which raises the neurotransmitter serotonin. So those are the neurotransmitters involved. And the last thing is brainwaves. Research using EEG and fMRIs in the last 5 years have identified precisely the brainwaves that are involved in flow state. That's what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago.
Right.
When you approach the flow state, the spike in norepinephrine and cortisol is accompanied by a very busy and hyperactive beta brainwaves. Mm-hmm. And then when you get too tired or you're frustrated or you're wise enough just to simply to let go and relax, that's when nitric oxide kicks in along with alpha brainwaves. And then once you get into flow state, along with dopamine, endorphins, and anandamide, you experience theta brainwaves. And theta brainwaves are the states that are experienced by longtime meditators. And that's the state where there's that optimum feeling and there's heightened performance. And we really rarely go into the theta brainwaves, during regular waking consciousness. And then after you leave the flow state, you go into deep, deep delta brainwaves. And this is the stage of memory consolidation. And along with
This is while being awake?
It's while being awake, but it's when you're coming out of flow. And there's a big boost in serotonin. And that's when you get that afterglow of just huge, immense satisfaction and all the good feelings that come along with serotonin. So that's what's actually going on in your brain. Now, one thing that we mentioned earlier is about, is it something that you can actually do? And it turns out that it's not really something you can do. It's tempting to think that we can.
Not yet.
It's tempting to think that we can make a prescription for it to achieve flow, but that's not the way it works. And like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, just from my experience in meditation and what others have said, flow comes from that underlying state at which you naturally exist. It's that part where you're letting go, and it's that area before thought, before feeling, before everything. The place where everything arises from, that is the center of flow. And you can't identify specifically where that is. And athletes, of course, experience this frequently. I remember, I'm not an athlete like you, but I used to race big sailboats, and you're racing 112-foot catch. And if somebody asked me after the race what happened, chances are pretty good that I wouldn't be able to recall very much of it, because you're just so in the moment, trying not to get killed and trying to beat the other guy. Right. That's flow. And musicians, of course, experience it when they're all the time, especially, in really inspired jam sessions. And I experience it as a copywriter too, at least a couple of times a week. Just writing a piece that takes a lot of really, really intense research. I'm basically flooding my brain in my entire system until it's overwhelmed, and then kind of like the floodgates burst. And that's when I start to write. And that's flow.
I think that's beautiful. And I think the reason so many people in society may never get to experience this is that we're all living this overstimulated reality. And it seems pretty evident to me that getting into that flow state requires you having to be present and aware, and probably over jacked up on stimulants. Does that sound like it's pretty consistent with your research?
The stimulants are not going to help unless you're supporting the stimulants. And when I start talking about the different neurotransmitters and the nootropics that you can use to optimize those neurotransmitters, stimulants need to be supported if you're going to use them.
Right. So meaning some of them are going to be, making you utilize acetylcholine more rapidly. So we're going to have to support acetylcholine, that type of thought.
Acetylcholine and dopamine. If you use something like, I'm adult ADD, so I use Ritalin, and I've been using it for about 12 years now. And one of the things that I found within a few years is that it wasn't working for me as well anymore. And I tried Adderall, and that didn't work at all. So I figured, but Ritalin worked really, really well at the beginning. So I had to figure out how it works, what's going on in my brain, and what can I do to support its use. And because it's a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, I just had to provide more dopamine and more acetylcholine to my brain. And when I did that with Nalt and Elcar, all of a sudden I didn't have any crashes anymore. And it just worked better. It kind of like potentiated the Ritalin.
Super interesting. That's a lot of, this is very important information that I think, I've started to make myself relatively familiar with after years and years of diving into this stuff and helping a lot of people start to heal their brain. But I'd like to start the conversation there before we get into, the mechanics of all the neurotransmitters, because I think so many people are living the reality of a broken brain. And I'd like to define what that means from an actual neurotransmitter level or even a brain biology level. and then how we can start to fix it. And, people are living, maybe it's post-traumatic stress, maybe it's brain injuries, maybe it's, poor diet, maybe it's brain fog. Maybe it's just some trauma that's preventing you, and maybe you're constantly living in an anxious state because you're overstimulated all the time, or, you're always in a sympathetic state. So your HPA axis is overstimulated. Can we start to just define, the idea of a broken brain and at least a few of the reasons that it happens and how we would start to address it?
That is a whole conversation in itself, and the reason why Nootropics Expert exists.
Yep.
Yes, and like all of the above. There's so many things that can go wrong. Just on the micromolecular level. You've got basically neurons in your brain, billions and billions of neurons, and they've got little antennae on them called dendrites, and little ascending arm called an axon. Something like the myelin sheath can be stripped off the axon so it can't send signals anymore. Or the neurotransmitter, the synapses are shot and they're just basically worn out. And if you don't do anything to restore them and keep them healthy, your brain's going to stop working, and you're going to get things like brain fog, or you're going to depression or anxiety. You can't think on your feet. Bad blood flow is another thing. Your brain uses 20% of everything that's going on in your body. And so you've got to have really, really good blood flow to deliver the nutrients and the oxygen to your brain, so that the mitochondria in your brain cells have got the energy that they need to do what they were designed to do. And if your blood flow is poor, it's not going to get the fuel that it needs. So there's all kinds of things that shut down blood flow. If you eat really crappy food and you clog up your arteries, or you've got a heart that's not working very efficiently, or your lungs are not in great shape so that you can't bring in the oxygen that you need. I could go on and on and on, but your brain needs the fuel. If you're lacking in certain neurotransmitters come from primarily two ways: from your food or from your gut. They're produced in your gut. And if you're not eating the right foods, or even if you're eating the right foods, I mean, this is a whole other conversation. Even if you're eating the best organic food that it's possible to find, you're still probably not getting the nutrients that you need because of what's happening with our environment, with the soil conditions that the plants are grown in. CO2, carbon dioxide levels have more than doubled over the last 100 or so years. And so an apple, for example, has got about 1/10 of the nutrients in it than an apple from 45 years ago. And there's clinical studies to show this. So it's just the food you eat is just not providing the nutrients that your body and your brain need to function properly. Or if the neurotransmitters are out of balance, if you've got too much dopamine, it's going to suppress serotonin. And then you get depressed, or you get really, really anxious, and you get irritable. If your hormones are jacked up, if your hormones are messed, for a guy, if your testosterone is not up to par, you're going to get brain fog. And for women, if your progesterone and your estrogen get out of whack, the same thing is going to happen, because the hormones directly affect how the neurotransmitters are created and used in your brain. And your thyroid is another one. If your thyroid is not functioning properly, and I'm hypothyroid, and I know exactly what that feels like. Things went south for about 3 years for me before I was finally be able to get them back on track. And there is a lot of people that are hypothyroid, particularly in the United States, that aren't even aware of it. And they wonder why their brain is not working correctly. So, they can try various nootropics and stuff, and if nothing's working, they better get their hormones checked out and get their thyroid checked to see if there's a problem there, and get right to the basics of what's causing the problem in the first place.
Hey, everyone. I interrupt this podcast to bring you a special message about the mushroom movement. So David Tomen talks a little bit about how to upgrade your brain. And you guys know that is the only thing that I'm focused on right now. My body is, spent the last 20 years being my primary focus. And now it's my brain and improving my consciousness, improving my awareness. And to do that, I need to be able to learn as much as possible, remember as much as possible, and always be on my game, always be at the top of my game. Energy can't fluctuate, mood can't fluctuate. I always want to be on. I always want to have my brain turned on. A big part of that is my daily use twice a day of lion's mane. I mix it in my coffee every morning. 3 grams, 2 packs of 4-sigmatic lion's mane is going directly into my coffee. It's going in there with some MCT oil. It's going in there with some alpha GPC, both of which are just going to help sustain that high level of performance that you guys know that you want and that I certainly can't go without. I absolutely love it. And, at night, I've told you this before, reishi, turkey tail, some chaga, all these things are helping me improve my immune system, helping me improve my life. I love life, and I hope you do too. And I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you love this episode with David Tomen. And when the episode is done, I want you guys to all head over to 4sigmatic.com/muscle and claim your 15% off lion's mane at very least. And there's a ton of other awesome stuff you're going to love on there. So they also make a pre-made lion's mane and instant coffee mix that when you're in a rush comes in super handy. I actually had that this morning because adding hot water and blending with my MCT oil is super easy rather than having to actually sit there and wait for my Chemex to brew and drip and all those things that goes with making amazing coffee in the morning. So 4sigmatic has done an incredible job of hacking our morning coffee routines and making it easy and fun and delicious and amazing and making my brain work better. Yeah. Enjoy the rest of the episode with David Tomen and check out 4sigmatic.com/muscle. Cheers. Yeah, it's so unfortunate. I mean, it's great that you're having this conversation because you're the guy talking about all these pieces, right? And this is what I'm trying to do is put together all these pieces because everyone's living the reality of a terrible environment and really low quality food. And we're all going to have to fight this uphill battle. And depending how your body chooses to break at this particular point in time, it may be your thyroid, it may be your gut, it may be your brain. But at some point, everyone's fighting the bottleneck. And there's so many different options and possibilities on how this thing's going to break down. From a brain perspective, if I guess there's a multitude of ways that someone could start experiencing just a poor functioning brain.
There are. And, that's kind of like the frustrating thing for me. And I have to give myself a check every once in a while because I get lots and lots of I've got tens of thousands of people coming to Nootropics Expert. And of course, at least once or twice a week, somebody comes on there that says, I'm dealing with depression. What do I do? And, I've got to be very, very mature about this and say, well, you got to find out what's causing it. It could be this, or it could be this, it could be this, or this could be this. There's no way that I can recommend anything to you to fix it if we don't know what's causing it in the first place.
Right. Are there any great doctors out there who you would look to as advisors and leaders in the space of understanding that particular conversation, the depression conversation?
For depression, Dr. Kelly Brogan.
Kelly Brogan, okay.
Yep. For ADHD, Dr. Daniel Amen.
Amen, yeah.
For hormones, Dr. Al Sears in Palm Beach. Those are 3 that come to mind.
Those are great. Thank you.
There's nobody that talks specifically about the brain on a granular level like we're talking about and what we deal with at Nootropics Expert. Those guys kind of like specialize in specific things, which is good because they really, really know their subject in those areas. Kelly Brogan helps people get off of antidepressants.
Wonderful.
And using natural stuff. Dr. Amen helps people not only figure out that they're ADD or ADHD, but what they can do to fix it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be prescription stimulants. It could be something as basic as DHA.
But they're looking at the big picture, right? They're not just saying like, hey, take the SSRI. They're not saying, hey, take the Ritalin or whatever it is.
You have to look at the big picture.
I know you do. You know
Really.
you do. But it seems like that doesn't seem to be the conversation that most physicians are having, right? Not to throw anybody under the bus, but it's like, hey, just take this prescription drug and get out of my office, and I'll see you in 3 months.
But you got to think about how they're trained, though. They don't know any better. I'm pretty anti mainstream medicine and anti big pharma, but I use some pharmaceuticals because I have to. But I know exactly how they work and what they're doing in my body.
Right.
Most people don't. They just come to rely on their family doctor, and the family doctor has gone to a school that is funded by the big pharmaceutical companies, and they don't get any training in diet. They don't get any training in how exercise affects your body. They don't get any training in natural, like herbs and those kinds of like dietary supplements. The people like that are very, very hard to find. I was very, very lucky to find one here in Miami Beach, who's a naturopath, who I think got trained in mainstream medicine, but then he went off on his own to learn how to treat everything naturally. So these types of doctors and nurse practitioners are possible to find. You just really, really have to dig for them and ask around.
That's fantastic. Now, is there any type of predispositions that you typically look for in certain populations? Meaning, like if someone's very athletic, so my demographic's very athletic, everybody trains. It seems to me that, I mean, you tell me, is there any particular ailments you see in certain populations? Obviously, you see tens of thousands of people. So, people who are very fit and athletic, do they tend to have a predisposition to having, one neurotransmitter to be out of alignment and whack, or is that completely a congenital thing? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and no, I have not noticed that. I think that it's a lot more. Everybody's body is completely different. And you could have two really, really in shape athletes that their brain is not working. And it could be two totally different reasons. So I found that you can't use that kind of broad brushstroke to describe a certain demographic or a certain lifestyle, because it just doesn't work that way.
Absolutely understood. Now, would you mind walking through the primary neurotransmitters that we can influence or that we're aware of and their primary functions? Because I think a lot of our listeners, I mean, you and I sometimes take these things for granted, and I know I do, that people just know what the primary neurotransmitters do. Can we just start there with like a broad stroke, walking through your glutamate, your GABA, your serotonin, and acetylcholine and dopamine, and even anandamide, and any of the ones that we know that are influenceable?
They're all influenceable, but this is going to be very broad. Acetylcholine, for example, a very easy way to understand acetylcholine is it's kind of like it takes care of signaling. Right?
Okay.
Brain signaling and signaling throughout your body. When you move your finger, that was acetylcholine working in your joints. But it affects every area it affects your memory, it affects your concentration, cognition, it affects neuroplasticity, like the growth of new synapses. And if you don't get enough acetylcholine, you get things like ADD, ADHD, Alzheimer's, stuff like that. Then another big one that everybody, for anandamide, the bliss molecule. That's the joy, the bliss, or the happiness molecule. It's an endocannabinoid, and it binds to cannabinoid receptors CB1 and CB2. And it's degraded by fatty acid amide hydrolase enzyme. And it's synthesized in specific areas of your brain that's associated with things like memory and motivation and higher thought processes and fine movement control. And it plays a role in appetite and infertility. It's directly involved in feeling sensations of pain. It even helps stop cancer cell proliferation. Now, anandamide, it provides anti-anxiety and antidepressant benefits in a way that you wouldn't expect. It affects it through neurogenesis. Yeah.
Oh, really?
And the thing about this particular neurotransmitter is it breaks down really, really quickly so that you're not in a perpetual state of bliss. Because you couldn't live if you were in a perpetual state of bliss. It's just like having a 24/7 orgasm. It would kill you. Right? So then let's go to dopamine. Dopamine is another big one. Dopamine is oh boy. Dopamine is on a very basic level. It's understood as kind of like the feel-good hormone, feel-good neurotransmitter, and it is associated with reward behavior like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But it's also directly related to things like memory formation and for learning and retention of those memories, for attention and focus, cognition. It even affects sleep and how you sleep. And insufficient levels of dopamine are directly associated with things like ADHD and Parkinson's. Epinephrine. Epinephrine, it goes like this. It goes phenylalanine to L-tyrosine to L-dopa to dopamine to norepinephrine to epinephrine. Okay, that's kind of like the end of the road. Epinephrine is also called adrenaline. And it's related to that fight or flight response. And it's actually secreted primarily by the adrenal glands, strangely enough. So you've got to have healthy adrenals to be able to produce epinephrine. And I don't know what else to say about it. Actually, epinephrine, it increases your heart output, and it raises glucose levels in the brain, so that when you have that fight or flight thing, there's a surge of energy and there's a surge of mental energy. It's coming from surges in epinephrine. But too much epinephrine is going to negatively affect things like memory.
Right. So epinephrine is that from my understanding, it's a downstream result of elevated dopamine. So is it walking through that? Yeah. So dopamine elevates and then epinephrine is kind of a consequence.
Yeah. If you don't have any dopamine, you can't get any epinephrine.
Got it. And now is that correlated also then with when epinephrine is released, it's almost a stress response, like a cortisol response. Are they simultaneous, or are they correlated in any way, or are they just completely separate?
I imagine they're correlated, but I don't know how they're correlated.
So those are all of our excitatory neurotransmitters. Actually, we also maybe should mention glutamate in that class, right?
Yeah. Glutamate, it plays a really important role in learning and forming memories. But you can get glutamate toxicity, and that's when everything breaks down. So there's specific things that you can do to keep glutamate in check. Histamine is one that we often don't think of, but it's actually a neurotransmitter. And histamine is involved in motivation and your like reward-oriented behavior. It's essential for the acquisition and storage of short and long-term memories. And when histamine goes haywire in your brain, it can lead to addictive behavior and diseases like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. What else do we have? We've got serotonin.
Now, would you call serotonin a slightly more inhibitory neurotransmitter? Just because again, the first ones we went through and correct me if I'm wrong, seem to be our stimulating, our excitatory neurotransmitters. So now we're just going to switch over to the inhibitory ones.
Very broadly, I suppose you could say that.
Okay.
It's not really an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Glutamate and glutamine and GABA are kind of like play a more fundamental role in stuff like
Okay.
that. Serotonin on its own is made from
Mm-hmm.
tryptophan, and your body can't make tryptophan, so you've got to get it from food. And 80% of it is produced in your gut, believe it or not. And they're still figuring this out. But the vagus nerve, the gut-brain connection, a lot of people that are dealing with major depression don't realize that the problem is starting in their gut and not in their brain. It's not environmental. It's not because daddy was bad to you when you were a kid. It's because your gut is messed up. And so when you've got adequate serotonin levels in your brain and it's working properly, you feel confident and you're easygoing and you're flexible and you're happy and you're positive. But serotonin deficiency results in things like depression. You're irritable, obsessive compulsive disorder. You're negative all the time and you're worried all the time. What else? Those are the big ones.
Awesome. So, David, I want to have the most ideal brain I can. So, as a child, I experienced a very poor diet. I was athletic. I was pretty active, but I don't think any human being on the planet had. I mean, many human beings probably had equivalent poor nutrition, but I had about as bad as it could have been. And I just kind of chalked it up, my life up as a child to I was just had a learning disability. I didn't have a good time in school. I was always said to be someone who was a troubled kid or had a hard time learning. I don't know if I was a troubled kid. I was a nice kid, but I was always, I wasn't going to amount to anything kind of kid, right? I wasn't getting good grades. I wasn't a good listener. I wasn't good at paying attention. And everyone just said, oh, that's your character traits. That's just where you're going to end up. You're going to end up, pumping gas at a gas station. And obviously that had everything to do with nutrition. Now that I know that, so if someone, thousands, if not millions of people out there who are listening, living with this reality of a poor functioning brain, in your experience, what are some of the first steps to starting to turn that around?
Change your attitude.
For sure. Step one, right? But sometimes an attitude can be a result of poor neurochemistry, right?
One of the simplest things you can do, but one of the hardest things you can do is change your diet. If I prescribed, this nootropic to raise serotonin, this nootropic to raise dopamine, and this nootropic to heal your damaged neurons, and this, you know what I mean? None of that would work very well if you didn't basically have a half decent diet. And this comes down to like the real basics, like the B vitamins. Yeah, the B vitamins are directly related to the synthesis of every major neurotransmitter. And if you're not getting enough B vitamins in your diet, you're spinning your wheels. It's not going to get better. Now, chances are you're not going to be able to get enough of it from your diet. So that's when a supplement comes in. And something as simple as a probiotic and a really highly bioavailable, nature-identical B complex that's much higher than the RDA, that combination right there turns around depression for some people. So I kind of learned all this stuff the hard way, because about 6 years after I was diagnosed adult ADD, I became hypothyroid, just all of a sudden, overnight. And everything shut down, man. Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. I was falling asleep at 2:00 every afternoon. I couldn't think anymore. My memory was shot. And I just this 2-column list of all the things that can happen when you're hypothyroid, I had 3/4 of them. The first thing that I did was I found out that I had to use natural desiccated thyroid to start providing my body with some of the thyroid hormones that for some reason it wasn't producing on its own. And that kind of tamed things down a little bit, enough that I could think through to the next step. And that's when I started figuring out what nootropics I needed to help me with things like memory and anxiety and depression. And but it was like a step-by-step process. I think one of the problems, Ben, and you know this, is people have been conditioned in this society to look for a one-pill solution. And they're
Absolutely.
saying, I've got this problem with anxiety. I need a pill for that. There is no pill that's going to solve the problem. You need to make some adjustments to your diet and then start looking at dietary supplements that can help start optimizing certain of the neurotransmitters that are out of whack.
So, David, one of my infatuations in my wisdom as I age is trying to turn back the clock, and I want to, improve "quote unquote" brain health, and I want to improve nerve growth, neurogenesis. Is there any particular supplements that come to mind as far as nootropics that could allow me to help with that? So, let's assume my brain is perfectly functioning. Whether or not it is, I think I've got a pretty good handle on how to do that, right? It's a meditation, it's good sleep, it's eating great foods, avoiding anything that's going to be toxic. Now let's say my brain is working at optimal function, whatever that defines out to be. But I know that I want to improve my capacity to learn, my capacity to store new memories, and my capacity to potentially add new nerves, improve neurogenesis. What would be my first order of business?
The first thing that comes to mind for neurogenesis is lion's mane.
Yeah. I've been sucking back lion's mane like it's my job for the last 9 months.
Lion's mane is just like a miracle drug when it comes to that. There was actually a study done. I'm not looking at the study right now, but there was a study done on rats, and they actually cut their sciatic nerve. And then they applied not lion's mane extract directly to those severed nerves, and within a couple of months the nerves grew back.
Like topically applied it?
Topically applied it.
Interesting. So I'm going to have a lion's mane bath when I get home.
So, and the other simple and very effective thing to do is to improve blood flow. And there's two ways to do that. One is pycnogenol or pine bark extract.
Yeah, I love that.
And the other one has been vinpocetine.
Been loving that one lately too. I've been doing 10 milligrams, is it milligrams or micrograms every morning, and actually noticing a difference. So I'm an experimenter when it comes to nootropics, and I'm trying to find.
You're talking about vinpocetine?
Vinpocetine, yeah.
I use it 3 times a day.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I was curious about, some of these things I'm very unfamiliar with. So I'm very protective of my sleep. So I try not to take anything within the last 3 to 4 hours before bed, knowing that some things can influence my sleep. So
you can take vinpocetine.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah.
It actually improves your brain or your dreams.
Oh, wow.
Well, think about it. If you got better blood flow when your brain is resting and it's trying to heal itself, that's when all the dreaming is going on, right? And if your blood flow is bad, that doesn't work so well. One of the ones that I found that's great for lucid dreaming, methylene blue.
I've never tried that, and I've heard tremendous things about that.
When I tried methylene blue the first time, that was one of the nootropics that the change was so profound that I noticed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was really, really cool. But anyway, methylene blue are for the braver of the people.
From
in
the
this
sounds
crowd.
of it, it's very safe.
It's extremely safe. My stepdaughter was in intensive care for 4 weeks. Just got out a few days ago. She almost died. And one of the things that they had prescribed for her in the hospital was methylene blue. Can
you tell us a little bit about it and what it does?
Methylene blue, somebody cooked it up back in the late 1800s. It's a dye.
Yeah.
In the early 1900s, some psychiatrists, and I don't know what these guys were smoking to get to this point, but they started using it experimentally for the treatment of schizophrenia. And now it's being studied as potential therapy for mild cognitive impairment, for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, and for other neurodegenerative disorders. My stepdaughter was in there because she had a major sickle cell crisis, which means that her blood the red blood cells are all messed up. methylene blue helped correct that.
Super interesting.
The thing is that it works directly in your mitochondria. And your mitochondria work, and there is certain the gene expressions and lots of molecule swapping back and forth. And if that process breaks down any place in that cycle, methylene blue kind of like inserts itself as kind of like it plugs the hole.
Mm-hmm.
It fixes it. I could talk for an hour on methylene blue, on what it does. That, the term magic bullet.
Yeah.
That actually was from a guy named Elric.
Yep.
Who coined the term magic bullet to describe the action displayed by methylene blue.
So I actually tried to find methylene blue on the internet maybe 6 months ago.
It's difficult.
Not easy to find. So I had a friend who is, they may or may not still be doing this, but they're trying to put together a methylene blue nicotine CBD gum. And I'm like, God, that would be like the best thing ever, except it would turn your mouth blue. But as far as like function, it probably would be the panacea of all nootropics, right?
It would be difficult to put enough methylene blue in there to make a difference.
That was the issue. So that was the bottleneck. They had one create it, but literally your whole mouth turned blue, so you look like one of the guys from Kiss.
And you pee blue.
Oh, interesting.
That's a lot.
With some people.
That's a lot of fun.
Maybe it's a Halloween trick or a party trick or something.
It certainly surprises some people.
Yeah, it's certainly if you're worried about it, right? If you don't know that it's actually, maybe there's kidney repercussions there, definitely something to think about. But
there's not.
No. Okay. Well,
it actually repairs it.
Oh, interesting.
There's no downside to methylene blue, really. The only thing is you got to be very, very careful about the methylene blue that you use, because most methylene blue is industrial grade, and they use it for things like detoxifying aquariums. So you don't want to buy the methylene blue that you find at Petco or PetSmart.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the methylene. There's actually a pharmaceutical grade methylene blue that has got as few heavy metals in it as you can possibly get. So it's very, very refined.
Do you know of a source, or are you at liberty to mention a source where somebody can access this?
It's a moving target.
Yeah.
It really is.
So if any of our listeners have access to methylene blue, let us both know.
Yeah, please tell us where you got it. But the thing is that where you got it today might not be available a month from now.
Well, I'm a pretty resourceful guy, David. So when I find it by the end of today, I'll definitely let you know.
There's actually a pretty long comments thread on my methylene blue article on Nootropics Expert. And I know that I'm looking for...
You've got so I'm looking at your website right now. You've got a pretty extensive deep dive into this thing.
Yeah, like 12 pages.
Yeah, it's tremendous. Getting into everything. So I definitely suggest everybody go to nootropicsexpert.com.
Yeah. There was one guy that had a website called Blue Brain Boost that was pretty famous for supplying pharmaceutical grade methylene blue, and then his credit card supplier cut him off. And somebody stole his domain.
Gosh.
And so he was offline for a few months, and then he came back and he says, "I'm back." So a Blue Brain Boost, you might still be able to get it there.
Now, are you doing 4 grams a day? What is it for?
I was doing 45 milligrams.
45 milligrams. Yeah.
Francesca, my stepdaughter, was getting 100 milligrams in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
But I found, I found 100 milligrams is probably more the, what do you call it when, I don't remember the term, when you're trying to heal something.
I'm not sure.
You know what I'm talking about, but yeah, 100 milligrams if you're really, really trying to heal things. But I was having pretty good success with just 45 milligrams a day.
Wonderful. I'm reading through your comments here on your blog. Well, that's great. Now, so the thing that came up there that we didn't touch on was, we haven't touched on a lot of things yet, but nicotine. Any opinions on beneficial or detrimental effects of nicotine as far as a
I
nootropic?
actually have 2 milligrams under my tongue right now as I'm talking to you.
I was chewing 2 milligrams when we started the conversation. I do it about twice a week, but I didn't sleep much last night, so sometimes I'll throw it in there, and I think it's great.
You've got 2 different kinds of acetylcholine receptors. You got nicotinic acetylcholine receptors and muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. And nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are named after nicotine, oddly enough. So you really don't want to get it from smoking cigarettes. But 2 milligrams used sublingually help. It kind of like keeps your brain firing on all cylinders, so you're thinking faster. Cognition is better. A lot of executives use this trick. Guys like Dave Asprey, when he's doing a podcast, he will admit to every once in a while having a nicotine. And you don't want to get the big. You want to get the mini tablets, because the big ones have got too much crap in them. Like the lozenges, the big lozenges that are about the size, a little smaller than a quarter. Those are filled with all kinds of additives and crap. You want the mini lozenges that looks like a Tic Tac.
Okay. Yeah. One of my mentors, who's one of the brightest human beings probably on the planet, Dr. Ted Achacoso, just completely advocates this stuff. So prior to 6 months ago, I'd have never considered it because of my paradigm around like, well, nicotine's bad, it's addictive. And he goes, you know what, just shut up and try it. And I'm like, okay. And he said, well, tell me if you feel any negative effects. And I felt incredible. My body feels like it's like a furnace. Like my mitochondria have all just turned on. My brain turns on. I feel no negative effects afterwards. Like certain nootropics that I take, example that comes to mind being huperzine, being an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. I feel it.
Yeah, the thing about nicotine is it not only boosts the release of acetylcholine, but dopamine and serotonin and glutamate as well. So it affects alertness and attention and cognition and memory and mood. It's kind of like a whole brain kind of thing. Huperzine A, you got to be careful with because it's an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. So it really increases. It messes with your acetylcholine. But the thing is that it's got somewhere between a 12 and 24 hour half-life. So it's really effective, but you can only use it a couple times a week.
And I honestly felt a substantial decrease in my brain functioning after. When I took it, I feel incredible. When I come off, you're like, God, I can't find my words and I can't articulate myself well and I can't remember things. So that was a huge thing for me. Like I've literally, kind of removed that from my medicine cabinet. Yeah, I'm like, I can't risk that.
Just don't do that.
Yeah. And no amount of alpha GPC on the back end seemed to make it go away. Whereas with nicotine, I felt better than I do on huperzine, and with no negative effects. I still feel like I can sleep really well.
Yep.
I wake up the next day and my brain feels better than it did the previous day. So I'm getting this benefit without seeing any downside.
Yeah, nicotine is a perfectly safe nootropic.
Fantastic. Good to know. So we spoke a little bit about increasing nerve growth in the brain. So we talked about lion's mane, pycnogenol, vinpocetine, and then got into a little bit about methylene blue. I'd like to talk about memory formation. So I know that everyone in the world, at least in my world right now, seems to be on this kick of everyone needs to read a book a week. And that's an awesome thing. Like I love that as a daily or a weekly goal. But the problem is I know for a fact that most of these people are reading a book a week and remembering 10% or less of this information. And that, to me is one of the stupidest things to do, because it's like working out without getting results, right? It's like, I'm just going to work out for the sake of working out, but not actually seeing any benefit from it. This doesn't make any sense. So what I'd like to hack personally is how can I increase my brain's ability to, one, stay focused on the task, and two, actually form new memories from this task?
Well, the first thing you got to ask yourself is how are memories formed? And the thing is that the hippocampus is involved in memory formation.
Yeah.
Glial cells are involved in memory formation. Dendrites and axons You've got so many different moving parts in the brain that all have to do with memory. And then to take it down even further, short-term memory is different than long-term memory. Because in long-term memory, you're dealing with long-term potentiation, and you're dealing with NMDA and AMPA receptors. And you're dealing with the RAS and ERK pathways and CAMP. So this is a whole other conversation, because if you want the best learning and memory available, you're going to have to do more than one thing. You're going to have to take care of your hippocampus. You're going to have to take care of your glial cells. You're going to have to take care of your dendrites. You're going to have to take care of your axons, and then make sure those pathways are working properly. So the first thing I would do is, we already talked about neuroplasticity. For dendrite health, you can use ashwagandha or artichoke extract. DHA is a must. Gotu kola, turmeric, all help the dendrites. The myelin sheath on your axons is critically important for brain signaling. And you have to have that for learning and memory. To produce and to protect the myelin sheath on your axons, you can use salbutamine. You absolutely need vitamin B1, which is thiamine, vitamin B12, which is methylcobalamin, vitamin B9, which is folate, and SAM-E. And you can use salbutamine.
Tell me about the effects of salbutamine, because that's one that I'm not familiar with, but that's been popping up a lot. And I know you put that really high on your list of recommended nootropics.
It is a synthetic derivative of vitamin B1, thiamine.
Right.
And the thing is that thiamine is essential for producing acetylcholine. If you don't have enough thiamine in your brain, you can't make acetylcholine. It's as simple as that. And that acetylcholine is critical for learning and memory. It also helps your body withstand stress. A lack of energy can contribute to poor mood and motivation. So thiamine or salbutamine can boost your mood. I find it one of the most effective antidepressants I've ever used.
Are you taking it every day?
Yeah, I do, twice a day.
More? Okay. What dose?
About 400 milligrams.
Each time?
Yeah, 400 milligrams in the morning and 400 milligrams around noon.
So the one thing that I'm noticing with a lot of nootropics is, as we talked about with huperzine, some of them have a really tremendous upside, but some of them have a downside.
Yep.
And with salbutamine, you're not seeing any type of negative effects. Obviously, if it's a vitamin analog, it's probably not going to be any negative effect.
Right.
Okay.
You don't want to, like anything, more is not necessarily better. You don't want to overdo it, but you can't OD on salbutamine.
Interesting. That's great.
And it's a great mosquito repellent.
Orally or topically?
Orally.
So that's an interesting thing. So I just moved house. I was in one house and I moved, a few blocks away. And what I noticed previously was we could go out in the yard, and I live in Florida, so there's tons of mosquitoes, and I would never get bitten by a mosquito. And I was like, what am I doing? My kids would just get destroyed. And now I'm in the new house and I'm getting destroyed with mosquitoes. And I'm like, what am I doing now in my diet that is preventing me from having this innate mosquito repellent? So it may be something along the lines of some type of supplement that I didn't consider.
Thiamine or salbutamine?
Really
when people around me are getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, I don't get touched.
Wow. And I never used to historically, but I couldn't figure out what the factor was.
Yeah.
Like, what was it? Was it my diet has changed?
Probably that.
Interesting. Good to know. Now, is that safe for children?
Yeah.
Because my daughter gets destroyed by mosquitoes.
Yeah,
I've never
seen. Use a smaller dose.
She's the canary in the coal mine, right? If we want to find out if there's mosquitoes within 3 miles, we just send her outside and they'll all land on her.
Yeah, 100 to 200 milligrams for somebody younger.
Okay, awesome. So you spoke about the dendrites and the axons and the glial cells, and just maintain that myelin sheath. How about hippocampal volume? Because that's super interesting to me. Like the idea of as we age, this hippocampal volume decreases because of nerve growth factor going down. I'm very, very curious to hear about your thoughts on that.
The very short answer is choline.
Yeah. Now on your site, you like acetylcholine rather than alpha GPC. Is that still the case?
I like using, I use both. The CDB choline that I use is in MindLab Pro, which I use as the base of my stack. But I also use alpha GPC because my brain, for some reason, is just starved for acetylcholine.
Yeah, I find the same for myself. I actually did, this is, I'm an experimenter. So everyone goes, well, the dose is 600 milligrams. So I would go 600 milligrams 3 times a day. And then I went to 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day. This morning, I actually did 5 grams and I want to see what happened. And I honestly felt like I was almost immediately put into a flow state.
Yeah.
It was pretty incredible. Like I was getting these incredible insights and, creative ideas, no negative effects. I had an incredible workout. My muscle contraction was fantastic. My brain was fantastic. It's very expensive, obviously, to do 5 grams at a time. But I'm buying it by the kilo, so I kind of just dump it into my coffee and blend it up.
Well, the thing about are you talking about alpha GPC or CDB choline?
Yeah,
alpha GPC. Yeah, you're getting too much if you get sleepy.
That's interesting.
If you just feel this fatigue that you normally don't experience.
How does that happen? What's the mechanism?
I'm not sure. But I just know that that's what happens.
Now, what was the name of the supplement you said as your base?
MindLab Pro.
MindLab Pro. Is that your supplement?
No, it's made by an outfit that I work with in England called Optonutra Advanced Nutraceuticals. Okay. I discovered MindLab Pro about 2.5 years ago, and it became my favorite pre-formulated nootropic stack because it's kind of like a universal nootropic stack. Anybody can use the thing no matter what their issue is, and most people experience a benefit from it. It's not like an immediate thing. You won't feel something, within a half hour of taking it, but using it long term, everything just gets better.
It's a nice formula. You didn't have any hand in the formulation?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice looking formula. I mean, it's basically all the things we just talked about, right? And short of PS, I mean, I think PS is a great one. Phosphatidylserine we didn't talk about, and Bacopa we haven't talked about, which is very interesting to me as well. As far as someone looking to, optimize my learning and my studying, is Bacopa one of your favorites for that?
It's not necessarily one of my favorites, but it is in the nootropics community.
Mm-hmm.
It's been around for thousands of years. Go ahead. And it's considered an adaptogen. Mm-hmm. And by an adaptogen, we mean something that helps balance things out. It was so important in Ayurvedic medicine that they call it Brahmi, and they still call it Brahmi. It's named after the supreme god Brahma. Yeah. It affects acetylcholine levels, which are critically important. It is a very significant anti-anxiety nootropic. It modulates levels of serotonin. So that one of you might, if somebody's looking for an alternative to a prescription antidepressant, Bacopa is one of the things that they should look at.
Super interesting. It's not affecting serotonin.
It helps boost serotonin.
Or it is. It is.
Well, it doesn't necessarily boost serotonin, but it modulates it to make sure that your brain is using it correctly.
Got it. So this is not just a European-based company. That it looks like they're all over the world.
Yeah, they're all over the world.
Awesome.
They make this stuff in the United States, though.
Okay, well, good to know. Now, so moving on to some other of your favorite nootropics. So you on your website, you've got an extensive list, and I'll definitely link to the website in the show notes of the podcast. But so if I want to, like I said, my focus is I want to heal my brain. I want to be able to have incredible focus, and I want to have improved learning. If it's energy, if it's whatever that is, those are great. But I think without focus, any amount of energy is wasted. So any other go-to for that?
That's how does focus work? It's kind of like related to attention, and motivation. Let me think about that. The things that we already talked about, if you've got your brain firing on all cylinders, of course, you're going to have but you're going to have better focus. It's related to dopamine and acetylcholine, but it kind of like goes down on a more granular level than that because it has to do with glutamate AMPA receptors. Let me see, what can we do that I haven't covered? Something like an ampakine, aniracetam.
Oh, love to talk about those. That's wonderful. I'm glad you brought those up.
Yeah, aniracetam. It's called an ampakine nootropic because it affects AMPA receptors, which affects acetylcholine, the way acetylcholine works in your brain. But aniracetam also activates dopamine D2 and D3 receptors. That is one of my absolute favorite nootropics, and I use that every day.
How much are you using every day?
800 milligrams twice a day.
How would that compare to something like oxiracetam or phenylpiracetam or all these other ones? So again, for me, I was like so protective of my brain for the longest time. And then, to be honest, speaking transparently, I give credit to Dave Asprey for inspiring me to try aniracetam because he's like, I've been doing it every day for 15 years. And that guy's a very bright human being who's never seen any negative effects to his brain, I'm guessing, at least not in the last 15 years. So he admits to doing 750 milligrams every day for 15 years, approximately, he says. He says he started at piracetam and then went to phenylpiracetam, and now he's at aniracetam and uses it every day. And I was like, well, with that type of vote of confidence, I'm going to try it. And it's definitely something that works. But how did
iodine.
Okay.
Oddly enough, because iodine activates dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine.
Really?
Yeah, because iodine is required for thyroid hormones.
Yep.
Right? It's actually part of the T4 and the T3 in thyroid hormones. And those are directly related to how your body or how your brain uses those neurotransmitters. Probably over half of the world is deficient in iodine.
Do you know some good dietary sources of iodine? I actually pulled it up on my phone, but I don't. Are you just supplementing primarily, or are you actually?
Yeah, I just supplement with it. The men's multivitamin that I use got iodine in it. If you don't have a good multivitamin with iodine in it, you just get an iodine supplement from somebody like Pure Encapsulations.
Okay.
It's very, very simple to supplement with, and it's very inexpensive to supplement with, but it's absolutely critical.
No negative effects of taking too much. So that's always the consideration, right? Is like,
sure, there are. Yeah. You don't want to overdo it, but you just keep your dose low until it builds up in your body, and then you just maintain that. You have to continue using that.
I'm on a website, and I looked up the best dietary sources of iodine. The first one was milk. The second one was supplements, and the fourth one is fish sticks.
Actually,
fish sticks. And I was like, this might not be the best website.
It doesn't sound like it. If you go into the vitamin store to the iodine section, there's two different kinds of iodine: kelp, or something like Lugol's. Lugol's liquid. Or you can get Iderol, which is Lugol's formula in pill form.
How much iodine do you take? So I'm actually looking at this list, and it says Himalayan sea salt. You're going to get 150 micrograms from half a gram of sea salt. So I'm doing 4 to 5 grams of sea salt a day. So I'm probably getting adequate iodine.
Yeah, I do 150 micrograms.
Okay, so from half a teaspoon of Himalayan sea salt, you're going to get that adequately. So, that's the best one that I'm thinking of is seafood, shellfish.
Yeah. You'll find that the places in the world where people are not as deficient in iodine live on the coast.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And their diet is based on the sea. People that live inland or don't eat a lot of things like fish or They used to put iodine in salt. That's the reason why you saw Morton's iodized salt.
Yeah.
The government mandated that the salt companies had to put iodine in it because people were deficient in it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the salt that you buy these days, there's no iodine in it, which has had negative effects because people were using salt with no iodine and they became iodine deficient.
So one other question that I have for you that I think is relevant is what are the nootropics that people are using wrong, or the one that they're using that maybe are giving them negative side effects that they don't know about?
Well, huperzine is one that I see coming up over and over again. That huperzine is good, but you only use it a couple times a week. Another one is DMAE.
Yeah.
For some bizarre reason, DMAE comes up in quite a lot of pre-formulated stacks, and I don't know why. Because people think that it increases acetylcholine, but it doesn't. DMAE actually stops choline from being taken in by other cells, and it just makes sure that there's more make sure that there's more choline floating around. The only I use DMAE, but the only reason I use DMAE is because it gets rid of lipofuscin. And I have to worry about lipofuscin because I used L-carnosine for longevity. But doing 1,000 milligrams of L-carnosine every day produces L-fuscin.
I don't know what lipofuscin is. Can you enlighten me?
It's, the brown spot, if you get brown spots on your skin.
Oh, yes.
That's lipofuscin. That actually happens inside your body, on your brain cells, on your heart, on your lungs, on your liver.
Sure.
It's not just on the outside. So they call them age spots for a reason. It's an accumulation of something that your body normally excretes. Mm-hmm. But if it's not excreting it fast enough, you get old and you die. So DMAE helps prevent that.
Great. So I think it would be negligent of me to not bring caffeine to the top of the list or people's attention and how it works. And is there anything else that can, mimic, in your eyes, the neurotropic effects of caffeine?
I can't really mimic it. You don't have to get caffeine from coffee. You can get caffeine from things like chocolate. Mm-hmm. Caffeine is an interesting one because it's an adenosine antagonist, and that seems to influence acetylcholine, epinephrine, and serotonin, and it boosts the use of how your brain uses dopamine. The stimulant effect that you get from consuming caffeine is because it antagonizes adenosine. Adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the fuel for your mitochondria.
Right.
As your body uses up that ATP during the day, you get a buildup of adenosine, which that's how your body naturally starts to get sleepy until you finally run out of gas. Caffeine inhibits that. That's how it works.
Is there anything else that works on the adenosine receptors? That's what that's what I'm curious about is it seems like caffeine's a very unique molecule. Now they've discovered teocrine and diamamine that maybe work on the same pathway, but is there anything else you know of that influences adenosine?
I haven't done a lot of research into that area, so right off the top of my head, I can't think of anything.
Definitely respectable. I mean, I appreciate you being honest. Now, is there any, other than salbutamine, is there anything that can influence improved sleep? So, I'm curious about, this natural circadian rhythm that our brain goes through, knowing that we have all these things that can amplify the brain. I know you're an advocate of, theanine and other things like that, but anything else that can help people come down from this enhanced brain state into something that's more of a calm, relaxed, meditative?
I can tell you what my sleep stack is.
Perfect.
Tart cherry juice.
Actually drinking the juice?
Yep. About 6 ounces of tart cherry juice, concentrate, not the blend.
What's the benefit of that?
It provides a natural source of melatonin.
Okay, and it's probably also a nitric oxide booster. You talked about that, right? Any type of red fruit.
That too, but primarily for melatonin. You don't really want to dose with melatonin. I've had really, really negative results with melatonin, taking that as a supplement. Tart cherry juice seems to be a safer way to do it. L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin, which is a precursor to 5-HTP, which is a precursor to melatonin. So it's kind of like the beginning of the pathway to making melatonin. So tart cherry juice is going to help you get to sleep fairly quickly, and L-tryptophan will help keep you asleep, and magnesium.
Any particular chelate of magnesium, or are you not a believer in it?
I use the one from it's a chelated magnesium from Doctor's Best.
Have you ever tried magnesium threonate?
I haven't, and the only reason why I haven't is because this one works so well for me.
I'm going to send you some threonate. So a company that I'm associated with has three, and I'll send you some.
Okay.
And it's incredible, the difference. I mean, you take that on its own, and it's a whole different level.
The reason why magnesium threonate exists is because they were looking for something that was more bioavailable.
Yeah.
So you just have to use less of it.
Yeah, I feel like it just works differently, though. I've tried the glycinate as well. I've tried, obviously, citrate and all the other chelates, but threonate just seems to work on the nervous system a little more effectively, and definitely extremely effective. So the company I work with...
That's interesting.
Yeah, the company I work with makes one called Mind Mag, and I'll send it over to you.
Okay.
Yep. David, I think that was an incredible deep dive, and I'm so grateful for all of your time. And I'll absolutely link to your books in the show notes and your website, because, as I said, this is a wealth of information that's incredible that you give it away for free. So I'm so grateful for you and your time. Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the episode with David Tomen from nootropicsexpert.com. I'm sitting here staring at his site, and it's definitely the resource I go to if I want to learn anything about nootropics. And if you are a little bit afraid of nootropics, it's okay, because I was too for a really long time. So I've been the guinea pig for you. I've been the one who's literally been trying everything, and I usually do them like one at a time. Like, what does this do? How does it feel? And I'll typically do them for 3 to 4 weeks. If I don't feel a benefit, I stop. And I'll always do a lot of due diligence before I ever put anything in my body. You guys know I'm a kind of freak about what goes in my body as far as especially supplements goes. So I definitely wouldn't be trying these things without tons of research and tons of word of mouth. I've got access to a lot of brilliant experts who are all experimenting at some level with nootropics. And you guys know my typical morning routine includes alpha GPC. It includes MCT. Obviously includes a little bit of coffee. And again, I'm not attached to the coffee. Coffee is just kind of the delivery mechanism for the lion's mane and the MCT oil and the alpha GPC. I could do tea. I could do anything. But coffee is, a great addition because a little bit of caffeine is very, very helpful. If you find you're using too much caffeine, one of the great ways to come off of it is actually supporting alpha GPC and supporting your brain with nerve growth factor and such, and making sure you're getting adequate delivery of blood, adequate delivery of oxygen to your brain with some of these nootropics that David Tomen and I discussed today. So as far as opinions about what we talked about, methylene blue, when I express an area of interest or I express an area of concern, I dive into this stuff. And methylene blue is something I dove into quite a while ago. And literally, as David attested to, I couldn't find anything negative about this stuff. It seems like the government is maybe regulating it because the government likes to do that, perhaps. But it doesn't seem like there's anything we can find that's bad about it. I haven't seen any negative research other than, as David also alluded to, there can be some quality concerns. Typically this stuff is made for fish tanks, and that's not something you want to put in your body. You got to make sure you're getting a good, high quality pharmaceutical grade source. And again, nicotine was one of these that I wasn't completely against for a long time. I grew up in a family of smokers, and I was like, I'll never put one of those darn things in my mouth, and never have. But now that I've experimented with a little bit of nicotine, I think it's a really, really cool asset to have in your back pocket. Now, I don't advocate using this thing every day or multiple times a day, but I think it can definitely be something you keep in your back pocket for a day when you really need to have your brain on fire and lit up. One thing we didn't dive into as much as I'd like to, and I kind of did this on purpose because is CBD, an endamide. And I'm going to bring somebody back and talk to you guys very, very soon about CBD. And I know that expert's coming up, so I didn't want to dive too much into it, but he did say some super interesting things about an endamide being the bliss molecule and potentially being an anti-anxiety and anti-cancer and improving neurogenesis. And now I don't substantiate those claims, but I will definitely be inquisitive and dig deeper into those claims when I bring the CBD experts onto the podcast. The primary things you guys want to be thinking about: if you're anxious, you got to support serotonin. If you're lacking drive, you got to support dopamine and acetylcholine. And if you're someone who can't slow down, you probably want to support GABA. Those are the 4 big takeaways from this podcast and from my experience. And as always, just make sure you're taking care of yourself. Eat great food. Don't put a bunch of crap into your body. Don't accumulate toxins, and your body will love you back. And as always, have a great day. Live your greatest life in your greatest body. Peace out. And I appreciate you all so much.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.